record it myself and it wouldn't matter.
Okay, but I didn't. Where's the request?
Yeah. I don't know. I pressed record and then it said request permission. And then I said, okay, please request permission. Oh, I don't care. Just, put it in the cloud and we'll figure it out.
Computer host. So now you should be the co-host. I don't know if that gives you permission to record.
Let's see. Oh, yes. Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah, I don't know if I'll use it or not, but we'll see. I like your ironing board.
Your what? My what?
You have an ironing board behind you.
Ah, yeah. That's I don't use it, to be honest. My wife uses it. Yeah.
It's good production values.
Yeah, thank you, Brad, for your time. How much time do you have?
I can sit and talk for a while, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I heard a lot about you. I think it's almost 20 years ago that I first came across your articles when I moved out of Antaiji to Osaka and I lived in a tent and I started my own homepage.
Okay.
Do you remember a guy called Jerry Gordon in Osaka?
I don't remember the name, but I might have...
Well, he came to the Zen meetings that I did in Osaka and he told me about you in 2001. When your homepage was still called Sit Down and Shut Up, or the other way around, Shut Up and Sit Down.
That would have been when I first started. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. You were writing about some cheesecake event at your office, and I think a lot of these articles later were used in the books.
Some of them were, yeah.
Yeah, so I followed you for quite some time, but this is the first time we meet, so I'm really happy that this happens. Well, we don't meet in real time. You are in California, I'm here in Japan. Usually when I'm visiting Germany, it's just a few weeks after you've been there or you come after me. So people tell me where Brad said this and what do you think about it? Or often people tell me you're the German version of Brad Warner.
Oh, no. No, I'm so sorry.
And I guess they mean that as praise, although my reaction, of course, is, well, Brad is Brad and I'm me.
Yeah.
So the reason I asked you for the interview was that I wanted to ask you 10 questions that last year a guy called Thorsten in Germany asked me. He made a film out of that people can see on YouTube. And I think his original idea was to ask you, but you had already left Germany at the time. So he couldn't ask you. I don't know, before we start the questions, if it's okay for you, can I also ask you some personal questions before?
Yeah.
And if it's too personal, if you think it's none of my business, just tell me.
Sure, yeah.
Like the last couple of years, we've been seeing you sitting in front of this bookshelf filled with lots of nerdy books. And then for a number of times you were sitting maybe in front of the same white wall where you're sitting now, and sometimes there were kitchen noises in the back. But recently you're sitting either in a porch or in the backyard. I think it's your girlfriend's house. Did you move out, or is it only because of the pandemic? Will we see that bookshelf again?
Oh, I don't know. It's mostly because of the pandemic. When it first started, it made more sense for me to just live here with her than to stay at my house. And we didn't expect it to continue this long. And now I'm just basically living at her place. And I go back to my own apartment once a week to check the mail, but that's about it. But yeah, I don't know if you'll see that bookshelf because I made a decision, slightly Zenish decision, just to get rid of everything. I haven't done it yet.
I see.
But I've started making the arrangements to get rid of, well, the books are going to be the hardest ones to get rid of, but my other collections of CDs and DVDs and things and guitars, I just have, it's stupid how many things I have. And it's just because I just acquire things over the years and keep them, you know, and since I've lived in the same place now for like 7 years, it's just become too much. And yeah, so I don't know if you'll see that bookshelf again, or it might be empty the next time you see it. might be no books on it.
Yeah, that would have been my second question. My second question, you said that you changed your lifestyle and you try to live more like a Zen monk. So probably,
yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, I kind of want to be. I mean, I look at you and I think, oh, there's a guy who really did it, you know. I mean, I don't know all of your background exactly, but I know Nishijima Roshi. Well, you know who he is. And he had this big idea, or he was very fond of the idea of just doing your practice in the middle of your regular life. He really didn't want his students to go live in monasteries or do the full-time Zen monk thing. He might have had his own specific reasons for that. You know, of course, you know, the way being a Zen monk is in Japan is, you know, quite a different thing from the way it is in the West, I suppose, and sort of a profession. And I don't think he wanted his students to become like professional Zen monks. So he encouraged that. And, you know, I just sort of did what I do, but because of the kind of person I am, I ended up with so much stuff. And having moved into my girlfriend's place for the pandemic, I just brought the things I thought were necessary. You know, I brought most of my, because I'm still writing books and blogs, so I brought most of my Dogen books and things that are related to that. And I brought a couple of guitars and some clothes, and I just don't miss the rest of the stuff. And the longer I'm away from it, when I go back and look at it, I go, oh, you know, I don't want this anymore. But of course, the specifics of the pandemic also make it more difficult to get rid of things, because all the places I would normally sell them to or donate them to are closed. I just inquired with a friend about whether I could, his wife works for the library, and he said, oh, the library isn't taking donations right now. So I don't know what I'll do with the books.
I see. So it's gonna be a couple of more weeks or so that you're gonna live with your girlfriend, or maybe.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, I don't know how long it's gonna be. I guess things are a little bit better in Japan than they are here. I think, well, I don't want to get into a discussion about it, but I think it's very political in America how they're dealing with the crisis. So they just keep changing things, and it's impossible to predict what happens next.
Okay. Well, maybe we can start with this list of questions.
Sure.
And maybe if we have the time afterwards, I can also ask you something about your new book, but let's start with this list. The first question is, who are you?
Who am I? Oh my God. You want the Zen answer or the normal answer? I mean, I think it's easier to give a normal answer, which is, you know, my name is Brad Warner, and I'm 56 years old this year. I started studying Zen in probably my late teens, early 20s. I'm not sure exactly what year. And it was sort of by accident. I found a teacher. I took a class at university called Zen Buddhism, just kind of, oh, Zen Buddhism, that might be interesting. I didn't, you know, I wasn't like, you know, I must learn about Zen Buddhism. And the teacher was a guy named Tim McCarthy, who was a student of a guy named Kobun Chino Otogawa, who was a person who was active in the US and Europe for many years. And I was really impressed by Zen, and I just started sitting Zazen every day as a university student and continued that on for many years, and then moved to Japan. I never lived in a temple or anything in Japan, but I had a regular job over there, and I found a teacher named Gudo Wafu Nishijima, who translated Shobo Genzo into English, and he ordained me, and he was the one who wanted me to ordain as well, he wanted me to be his Dharma heir, is what he initially said, but then he said I should do a Jukai ceremony, and then I also did a novice priest ordination with Sotoshu through him. But that's so many years ago, I'm probably not on the books at Sotoshu anymore, because I never, you know, did the thing where you have to renew it or go to the next step or anything like that. Yeah, and then I wrote a lot of books, and that's my life story. As for who I really am, That's a big Zen question.
Do you want to try to give the Zen answer as well?
Well, the Zen answer is too difficult. I always feel pretentious when I give that answer. I mean, there's a sense that we all are aspects of one undivided something, and we are the sort of individual aspects of that, and so we are both individual and part of a larger whole. And I believe that, and I've worked enough with the Zen thing that you if you do enough Zazen, you start to kind of experience things in a different way. And that explanation, which when I first heard it from my teachers sounded very abstract, now sounds like a better explanation than the explanation I grew up with, which was, just that I am my individual life story. I can see that there's a wider connection to the universe as a whole. So, I'm speaking as much as possible when I do my talks and things. I try to speak from that more universal aspect, but of course, the personality always gets in the way and likes to have its own little insistences here and there. So yeah, ultimately, I don't know. That's the standard answer. That was it Huene? Not who does it? Who does that? The emperor asks him who he is, and he says, "I don't know."
Yeah, Bodhidharma and
that's Bodhidharma. Why did I forget who that was?
Yeah. Okay, let's get to question number 2. What is enlightenment?
Oh my God, that's a hard one. Remember, there used to be a magazine called What is Enlightenment, but then the person who made that magazine had a whole lot of scandals and things. So
Andrew Cohen,
yeah. I don't think he really knew what enlightenment was, but I don't know. To me, it's a funny word. It's the word that is used as a translation in English for words like satori and kensho, and using the word enlightenment as a translation for satori almost makes sense because satoru is to wake up. So it almost makes sense. But kensho is seeing into the nature of things, which is different. There's different ways of answering that question. I mean, one way to answer it is in terms of an experience that people have, and you can, if you look at the trajectory, the timeline of somebody's life who is practicing, you can sometimes say, okay, on this day at this time, this person had an experience of enlightenment, and that would not be wrong, wouldn't be completely wrong to say that. But at the same time, if that experience is authentic, then it is also kind of removed from time. It's not really an experience that takes place in the same realm as time. It's sort of touching something that's timeless. And I tend to not use the word enlightenment very much. I mean, I do use it occasionally because it sets up an idea in a lot of people's minds. And I know this because it set up this idea in my mind when I first heard it as a young person, that there was some kind of experience that you could have that would then fundamentally transform you into something else. And in a sense, those experiences do transform a person. You can't really be exactly the same person anymore after you've had one, or more than one. It depends how many people have, but at the same time, it doesn't, like Dogen says, the reflection of the moon doesn't break the dewdrop. That's his metaphor. And I always took that as a metaphor for that experience of awakening doesn't shatter the person that you were. It just gives you a different perspective on that person, and it becomes less compelling, the story of that person. But of course it can, it comes and goes for people. You might have that experience and then immediately reassert, that same sort of personality and the same sort of attachment to that personality that you had before the experience. But I think even if you do that, it's never going to be quite the same, because you'll always know that, oh, this isn't right. I don't know. That's not a good answer, but that's an answer.
Thank you. The third question would be, are there any qualifications for enlightenment or awakening?
Any qualifications for enlightenment or awakening?
Well,
I don't know.
I understand the question as well. What conditions need to be fulfilled for somebody to... Well, I don't know if that's the meaning of the question. That's how I understood it. What needs to happen for a person to get enlightened or to awaken?
You know, I don't know. If you put it that way, I think sometimes people, I've heard stories of people sort of coming to it spontaneously, and people from different sort of traditions having different experiences of it. There's one story, I can never remember who the person was, of a guy. He was during World War II. I think he was an Englishman, and a bomb is falling on his city, and he thinks, well, this is it, I'm going to die. But the bomb hits the ground and it doesn't explode. It's just a, you know, one of these bombs that doesn't work. And he had this experience of a fundamental transformation, and he ended up, I think, going to Zen teachers to try to find out what, you know, try to find some context for that experience. I wish I could remember the guy's name, but, you know, I think things like that probably happen. I don't know that it doesn't seem to me to be the sort of thing you can force into happening. It's sort of my, I don't know how you feel about the Rinzai tradition, but it's sort of my argument with the Rinzai tradition is that they seem to try to create a situation that forces an experience like that to happen, you know, by putting a lot of pressure on the person and making a very intense sort of environment that they have to deal with, in the hopes that they'll have some sort of an experience as the result of it. But I don't think it always works. And the Soto tradition tends to be more slow. You're just trying to kind of prepare the ground. You know, you're trying to do all this Zazen to make the mind quiet enough that when the experience wants to happen, the mind is ready to receive the experience and do something with it. I think it's sort of my feeling about how that works. And in that sense, the Soto tradition just forces you to just wait and sort of be like, well, you know, maybe something will happen. But also the Soto tradition tells you don't expect anything to happen, which I think is also a very good tradition.
Yeah.
But it's impossible for anybody who's practicing not to expect something. You know, I think we all expect something, and maybe that's not always good. You know, it just gets in the way when you're expecting things to happen.
Well, it's often said that we are already enlightened, or we are already Buddhas. But then the question would be, well, how come that we don't realize that, at least most of the time? What is standing in the way between us and enlightenment?
Yeah, what do you think is standing in the way?
Yeah, basically it's the question, where's the delusion coming from? Where's the blindness coming from? In Christianity, the question would be, where did the apple and the snake come from? If God created everything, how come there was a snake and an apple that they were not supposed to eat? And in Buddhism, if we're all enlightened, as Mahayana Buddhists seem to agree on, how come we're deluded?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's sort of we stand in our own way, and and I don't know why. I don't know why the delusion is there, but it does seem to be there. But it's an argument you could make. You know, a lot of people who haven't tried working with this tradition would say, well, the answer is simple. Nobody is enlightened. You're just making this up, you know, and everybody's just deluded. And
the people who talk about enlightenment are the most deluded of all. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't believe that. you know, there was a certain sort of, when I met my first teacher, I felt like this is a person I can trust, you know, and there was a feeling of deep trust, and I trusted him, and I worked with the practice for a lot of years. And same with Nishijima Roshi, I trusted him and I worked with the practice, and I could tell that they weren't crazy. You know, maybe this is why there's so much emphasis on it being a person-to-person transmission in Buddhism, because if you just read it in a book, it's easy to sort of go, wow, this book could be written by a crazy person. I don't know who wrote this book. But if you engage in it with a human being who you know, because I knew Tim, my first teacher, pretty well. We even shared a house together for a couple of years. So, at that point I saw him every day, but I would see him even before then very frequently in a lot of contexts. And so I could be certain this was not a crazy person. And this was not a person who was trying to deceive me or sell me anything or trying to, I don't know, do something. Deceive me is about the best word I can think of. So I could tell that there was so when he talked about enlightenment or awakening, and he would talk about these things sometimes, I thought, well, he's done this practice and he has some kind of experience from this practice, and so it must be something. It must be something. Yeah. I don't know what it is, but that made me willing to work with it. So
yeah, let's get to the next question.
Sure.
What is the role of Zazen and how do you practice it?
Well, how to practice it is easier to answer than what is the role of it, because what you practice is by sitting still on a cushion and as much as possible trying to ignore the processes that are going on in your brain. You try to ignore that little voice in your head that's telling you, whatever it's telling you that moment. And it's a very simple practice. The shikantaza is extremely simple. It's so ridiculously simple that when people learn it, often they're confused. You're like, well, that's it, and you go, yeah, that's it. I can teach somebody how to do shikantaza in about 5 minutes if I really want to, but it takes a lifetime to kind of understand, exactly what it means. What is the role of it? I sometimes wonder, for me, it's been necessary. When I first started practicing, I was a very frantic young person, and Zazen helped me kind of cope with the franticness of being young and, having the particular issues that I did in life. And as I've gotten older, I just came to rely on it as a kind of island of serenity that I can always return to, especially with the things that are going on in the world today and all the weird uncertainty and stuff. It's been really good to have this practice. It doesn't completely solve every problem, but in a sense, it gives me a perspective on the problems that I wouldn't have if I didn't do the practice. So I do this practice and I can kind of see, oh, the problem isn't, well, there may be a problem out there in the world. You can certainly say that in a lot of situations, but the more immediate problem is how I'm dealing with that problem that's out there in the world. Because I have a bit of a, I don't know if choice is exactly the word, but I have a bit of, I guess choice is a word. I can address it one way, or I can address it another way, and I choose to address it by sitting. So I suppose that's the role of Zazen. I don't know.
Has your practice stayed pretty constant the last 35 years, or have there been has it been more intense at some points and less intense in the other ways? your need for Zazen different now than it used to be 30 years ago?
It's an interesting question. And when I first started, I was pretty intense about it because I just thought, well, I gotta figure this out. And I think as the years went on during my 20s, I became a little less serious about it, but I always came back to it. You know, I know that I quit a few times, but not like I quit and I'm gonna, you know, never do it again. I just stopped doing it, but I would always notice if I stopped doing it that my mental state would become worse and worse. And the first several times this happened, I stupidly didn't realize the reason. You know, I'd be going, well, am I drinking too much coffee? Am I, you know, is it something that's going on? And then I'd finally go, oh, it's because I stopped doing Zazen. And so I'd start doing Zazen again. And this happened, you know, a few times. So there was that. But by the time I moved to Japan, I was 29, I guess, when I moved to Japan, I was back on the, you know, I was back on the being serious about it. I was serious about it. I lived with Tim for a couple of years just before moving to Japan. So I was sitting every day then. I moved to Japan. I didn't really I lived in Japan 11 years as it happened, but when I first moved there, I thought I would be living there about a year or two. So the first year I didn't really try to find a teacher or a temple. I just kind of sat on my own, although some friends of mine and I went to visit some temples a couple of times. And then the second year when I was in Japan, that's when I moved to Tokyo and I discovered Nishijima Roshi. And he, of course, was very dedicated to Zazen. And I thought, well, he's very dedicated to it, so I'm going to, you know, continue my dedication to it. So, you know, from then on, I definitely sat every day. So I don't know how often I quit during the first, you know, 8 to 10 years of practice. But I think I was practicing almost every day for those years. And then after I got to Japan in 1993, I guess, I've been pretty consistent. You know, it's with the excuse me, with the current lockdowns and with not being able to really move around and travel much, I've started doing more Zazen every day, but it's still every day, you know. Yeah. So I've just added a bit more time each day because I figure, well, I might as well because I'm stuck at home anyway.
So how long do you sit now, or how much Zazen do you sit now per day?
Most days recently it's been about 2 hours, so wow. I sit 40 minutes 3 times a day. I don't, you know, I mean, there's some days when it's not quite, but I think it's been pretty consistent since March that it's been, you know, 3 times 40 minutes per time and every day. So
by yourself?
Yeah, pretty much. We have our meetings via Zoom, and so 2 times a week I sit with the group online, and but then the rest of the time I'm sitting by myself. Yeah.
Do you notice any difference between the online sitting and sitting just in your room with the camera and everything off?
Well, I guess if you put it that way, I thought you were going to ask a bit between online and like in person. But yeah, it is different. If I do feel a sense of some kind of community if I know that there is a group. You know, I face away from the camera, of course, when I'm sitting, but so I'm not seeing the camera. At first I was facing the camera and that became very distracting. So now I face away from it. But I know that they are there, and it does feel like there's a sense of community, and we're managing somehow. The sense of community is what I most miss about these days. But you know, you can get a bit of it online somehow. Are you sitting with people? I think you are with your. With
I
a group?
started again this month to sit actually with people in one space. I have a sitting group in Osaka. We meet each Sunday morning in the park close to the area where I used to have my tent and actually live 20 years ago. And because of the Corona pandemic, we couldn't meet for 2 months. And then it was all online, or the sitting I did live stream on YouTube. So
Oh, I've seen those, yeah.
I couldn't see the others, they could see me. And when I went back to Antaiji, so officially I'm still the abbot until September or so. So I'm visiting Antaiji once a month. And when I'm there, sometimes I live stream Zazen there. And well, not everybody is enthusiastic about having their practice streamed on YouTube. And I can kind of understand it, because I mean, there's always the awareness now I'm on the internet and everybody can see me here. So on the one hand, I can see your point, the sense of connectedness, but now people tell me, can you please still live stream even when we again meet in person? So there's this constant request, can you please do more on the internet, and can you please do a little bit more of this and that? And well, for one thing, there's this consumerist aspect, and also it's this, well, it's good. It's good to be able to share that on the internet, but sometimes I enjoy to just have the camera off and to not be on the internet as well. So
yeah, it's a funny question, because now that we do our Zen on Zoom, about the same number of people. It was when we were doing it at the space in Los Angeles, it would be between 10 and 15 people each time. And now it's still between 10 and 15 people, but it's different people. And I know that a lot of these people, you know, we've been doing it for months now, and they've come to really enjoy it, and they don't want it to end. And so I have to think about, you know, once, I don't know if Los Angeles is ever going to, they seem to be keeping the lockdowns forever in Los Angeles, seems to be their plan. But I assume it'll go away at some point. And once we're able to sit together, I do want to continue offering it for those other people. But I can see that the camera does make a difference. You know, you have and the fact the conversation we're having now is a little different because we both know we're recording it, you know, so it's not the same sort of conversation. I mean, it's a good conversation, but when people are being broadcast, they act differently. So I don't know. I've been trying to figure out what to do. I don't want to stop our Zoom meetings, but at the same time, I think the in-person thing, once it becomes possible, is also extremely important.
The next question, you already talked about that a bit. Who is a teacher? What is the role of a teacher? How do you recognize a true teacher?
That's a tough one. Yeah. How do you recognize a true teacher? I think is kind of a intuition, like a gut, feeling, as we say. It's hard to give any specific qualifications. In fact, there's that, I'm sure you know the line by Haitokuzui. There's a line in one of Dogen's writings about how, a teacher is not this or not that, and that, you can't say that the teacher has these certain qualifications. It could be a man or a woman or a child, or, I think is what he says, something like that. You don't know. You could be an old person, a young person. You just have to kind of recognize that this person is a teacher, and sometimes the teacher themselves doesn't recognize their own qualifications to be a teacher. So, on the other hand, in fact, I usually refer people to something you wrote when they ask me about this. There are certain, if you can get very technical and specific about how a person is qualified to be a Soto Zen teacher, and there's a certain, certain paperwork and certain traditional ceremonies one is supposed to have, and so forth. So, so in that in that sense, you can make some definite statements. But the role of the teacher is sort of a catalyst. You know, Dogen does say that you need a teacher to study Buddhism. And a lot of people, when they hear that, are a little bit disappointed. Disappointed isn't the word. Sometimes they're a little bit upset to hear that, because they think, well, why do I need a teacher? I can figure it out on my own. But my experience is you do need that. And I looking at other traditions, you know, we can talk about the corruption in the guru tradition in Hinduism, but it doesn't always get corrupted. And they also have the same tradition that you receive this from a guru. You receive a certain kind of instruction from a person, and you pick up on that instruction, and then you carry it on yourself. So there does seem to be a role. The teacher seems to be a connector, you know, in that sense, between the person who's seeking the truth and the truth itself. And it sort of has to come through that connection. And, you know, explaining why that is, you could get into very metaphysical areas of speculation, but I'm not sure that speculation is really worthwhile. It just seems to be that's the way it is. Tim McCarthy was the initial catalyst for me to start studying it, and I know, if I think about my life story, I know I needed him. You know, I needed a person to stand before me and say, this is the thing to do. And sometimes it doesn't take much, you know. Sometimes it's just one or two conversations, and then you can kind of get it. Or sometimes you have to study with a teacher for a long time. I studied with Nishijima Roshi for a long time, and there were a lot of times when I thought, oh, I don't understand this man at all, you know. Yeah, he seemed to have more confidence in my understanding than I had in my own understanding. So that was interesting to me, because I thought, oh, he thinks I understand this. I don't think I understand this. I don't know who's right.
So you had a Japanese teacher. I never met Nishijima Roshi in person, but he had a lot of Western students. I guess you also had Japanese students. Would you say that Japanese students have a different way to relate to their teacher than we Westerners? And is it okay that maybe we have a different idea of how the teacher and student role or this relation should play out? Or is there one true relation between teacher and student that works for both Westerners and people from the East?
Yeah, it's a hard question, because it's tied up with the cultural differences, and there's a very different way in Japan, as you know, of anybody relating to any sort of a teacher. You know, once somebody is called sensei, then they become a sort of different thing, and Japanese people tend to be very receptive to instruction. And I don't know if German people are the same. Americans are almost always like resisting instruction. You know, we tend to have this individualistic idea that you know, I know better, and I'm even guilty of this. And sometimes I think I've missed out on a lot because I insist on learning it myself and not going through a teacher. I think when I'm saying this, I'm thinking about the way I play guitar and things like that. Because I had a teacher for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months at the very beginning. And then after that, I just learned on my own, you know. And I think, oh, if I'd really studied with a teacher, I would be a much better guitarist now. And so in the Zen sense, I did study with a teacher, and I had a kind of faith in my teachers. So I don't know the difference. You know, I did notice the difference in the way Japanese students of Nishijima Roshi related to him and the way we Westerners related to him. The Westerners were much more, I don't want to say confrontational, but we would, rather than just sort of listening to him and going, oh, so desu ne, you know, whatever. We would ask questions and kind of have a little bit of a debate. And there were certain Japanese students who I noticed would specifically come if they understood enough English. They liked to come to the lectures that he did for Westerners. And I think the reason they liked it is because they would get that kind of interaction that you just don't, Japanese people just don't like to engage in that sort of thing usually. But of course, that's a stereotype. I mean, there are Japanese people who do engage in that sort of back and forth with their teachers. So, you know, it doesn't always work out that way. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's okay. I think there's different ways. You know, Nishijima Roshi he didn't like the way Zen was being taught in Japan, even though he traveled outside of Japan during his life, but he never lived outside of Japan. But I think he preferred Western non-Japanese students to Japanese students because he thought more depth was going to happen in the relationship.
But using his model of the autonomous nervous system, you could say that we Westerners we have a more active sympathetic nervous system, while the Japanese are more on the parasympathetic side, and that the ideal would be somewhere in between, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, yeah.
The next question would be, how do we overcome suffering?
Oh, how do we overcome suffering? I don't know. I think there is a way, and the Buddha certainly said there is a way. And suffering is always kind of self-created. I mean, you can easily point to, you know, if somebody has an accident or a disease or something, and you'd say, well, that person is suffering, and it's not just in his mind or something. But in Buddhism, that's not really the kind of suffering we're talking about. We're talking about this kind of mentally inflicted suffering that we put on ourselves by resisting the situations we find ourselves in. And I think it's almost natural to resist some situations, because some situations are not very good, you know. You think about, because of the time we're recording this, I think about the pandemic. You know, if you know, we all want to see a solution to this, and I'm very glad that there are medical people and others who are working very hard to come up with a solution that fixes this problem. You know, and that could go for any problem, you know, whatever the problem you have, you're trying to kind of deal with it. But there's a secondary problem, which is the problem of, okay, well, here I am at home, you know, and I'm not qualified to work on a vaccine or anything like that. So I can't directly affect this problem, but I suffer, you know, from anxiety and so forth related to it, related to the future of the world or everything. But all of that's in my mind. You know, what will happen is largely out of my conscious control, and largely the action of a lot of things coming together, which are almost beyond my ability to understand. I'm thinking of things like karma and things like that, you know. I tend to believe in the idea of karma. I think, you know, you're kind of stuck with a certain set of things karmically. And Nishijima Roshi had a funny idea about that. He would say there's the karma, and then you also take action in the present moment, and the action in the present moment is more powerful than your karma. But you know, the action in the present moment can be something like doing Zazen. So you're not affecting the, you know, whatever the problem you happen to have is. It may not seem to be affected by your Zazen practice, but I think it is, in this kind of subtle way, a subtle but very powerful way. And I have a lot of faith in Zazen. You know, Dogen writes in I think it's in Bendowa, in that section they usually call Jujuyu Zanmai, where he's talking about if one person sits zazen even for one moment, the entire earth becomes enlightenment, and the entire universe experiences awakening. And I think that's true. So now I've forgotten exactly what the question was that I went here with, but I think there's a tremendous power in that.
The next question would be, how do you transcend the ego?
How do you transcend the ego? Yeah, I remember when I first started doing Zazen, I made a mistake that I think a lot of people make a mistake of, which is to think that the ego was something solid and it was my job to sort of pound it into submission, like just force it to, and to kind of destroy it. But and this isn't the fault of my teacher, because I know that Tim never said that. In fact, he would say just the opposite, and I had to learn to listen to him when he said the opposite. So it's not a matter of trying to destroy the ego or the sense of the personal self. I think it's necessary or useful to have a sense of personal self. But overcoming it means kind of seeing it for what it is. And if you can see it for what it is, it's a beautiful thing to be able to see it for what it is, because you realize I don't have to worry about that. I think that one of our problems with the ego is we worry a lot about it. We worry about protecting it and trying to enhance it, trying to keep it going forever, some of us. And at some point in practice, you can start to realize, oh, I don't have to do that. That's just a waste of energy. It's okay. Whatever I am transcends any of the categories that I've created that I call my personal self. And it's sort of, what I really am is sort of indestructible in a way. Or maybe the way to say it is that the idea of destruction doesn't even apply, because it was never something to begin with. It's just a set of ideas, and you can't protect a set of ideas, they're just ideas. So in my own practice of Zazen, I come to that, and then I forget it, and I come to it, and I forget it, I come to it, and I forget it, over and over. But the moments when I realize that there is no ego as a solid thing to defend, and that I can let it go, are the best moments of my life. And sometimes they come about spontaneously. You don't even notice it. I'm playing with the dog. We just got a dog a month or two ago. And after playing with the dog for a few minutes or whatever, I realized, oh, I haven't noticed my ego at all, and sometimes it comes in a more deliberate way, in sitting Zazen, and sometimes you can just feel it sort of go away. And that's nice. I'm like, oh, I don't have to worry about that thing anymore. But how to do it is tricky, because it seems to be you're not doing something, you're refraining from doing something. You're clutching hard at this thing, and it's like Uchiyama Roshi said, opening the hand of thought. You just open the hand and let go of this thing that you were holding so tightly to. But when you put it, the question of how do you transcend the ego, it makes it sound like it's something you must, you do actively, but it's more like something you withdraw your attention and your desire from. And when you withdraw your attention and desire from it, then it just goes away naturally, because it was never anything in the first place.
The next question is, what is the role of devotion in Zen Buddhism?
The role of devotion? Well, I mean, we say we devote ourselves to the three treasures, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. There isn't really a devotional tradition the Christian or the Hindu sense, where you kind of worship an object or something. But I guess to me, the devotion is more an idea of being serious about it, of not just putting it on as a pose or something. I am truly interested in Buddha and Dharma and Sangha, and I want to dedicate myself to, making it available. It's kind of weird, I think about, I don't tend to have a self-image of being a person who's very devoted to Buddhism. And yet if I look at my life story, I think, oh, I seem to be a person who's really dedicated to this, I think it's important. I think the world needs it. I don't think it necessarily has to be called Buddhism. There are different approaches to the same thing, but for me, the Zen Buddhist approach is the one that works the best, and so that's the one I'm devoted to.
Second to last question: how does one practice Zen in daily life?
How does one practice Zen in daily life? In my own life, I mean, part of it is like we talked about. I sit Zazen every day, and even in times in my life when I haven't been stuck in one place for months, I still make the effort to sit Zazen in the morning and sit Zazen in the evening, even if I have to do other things during the day. And then as I am going about my day, I try to remember as often as possible the practice and bring my mind back to the sort of openness that is available during practice. I mean, a lot of people talk about it in terms of focus. Focus makes it sound like it's a hard thing, that you're making a great effort. But to me, it's more openness. It's more the letting go. And because of maybe the kind of personality I am, it's sort of hard to let go. So I have to remember, okay, let go, let go. As the Christians say, let go and let God.
So the last question here on the list would be, when you meet someone who seeks for the way, what would your short advice would be?
What would be my short advice? It's hard because, for one thing, when I meet people like that, I always try to find out if they are serious about it or not. And because of the work I do meet a lot of people who are serious about it. So, that part's easy. And if a person is serious about it, I would just say, well, here's what I did. And I don't claim to be a genius or the best at it, but, I did make this effort and it did help me. And so if you want to learn this way, I can try to teach it to you. I'm always trying to be a better Zen teacher. It's been a struggle for the last few years, and especially this year, to find, I'm trying to use the opportunity presented by the things that have happened this year to focus on what will make me a better Zen teacher when I am again able to come out to the world and start to teach face to face again. And it's difficult to say when that will be. But yeah, it's so finding the right thing to say is always difficult. I try to listen to what the person is bringing me when they bring me whatever it is they want to talk about, and then respond honestly, and I try not to appear to be something I am not. But I've also found, I mean, this is the sort of question I could ask you. because I'm sort of curious about your way of doing it.
Mm.
You kind of follow a more traditional path, I think, in a lot of ways. And I've always found that difficult because I feel wrong in it. I feel like, oh, I'm not qualified to wear these robes. I feel like but I've realized that students kind of need that, and they need a little bit of almost an authority figure. And I've always had difficulty putting myself in that role, but now I've noticed that maybe I'm doing a disservice to people who come to me by not being a little bit more of an authority, or at least expressing more confidence, because I do have a strong confidence in the way that I was given by Tim and by Nishijima Roshi. And I just don't always have a strong confidence in my own ability to transmit that way. So, sometimes if you put on the robe and look the part, it makes it easier. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, having a certain frame makes it certainly easier. Of course, there's also the danger to always to get attached to that frame or to the form or to the teacher. So
yeah.
Like I think you used the metaphor of an artist or a musician, and you have a teacher, but it's not that the artist teaches you how to produce art. More, you got an example, and the artist kind of tolerates you to learn. But then, in practice, there's this question: how far does this tolerance go? How much do you want people to allow to actually be with you? And if you tell them, hey, stand on your own feet, do you do that really to help them, or are you just annoyed? Like in some of my old articles, I was commenting critically on things that you wrote on the internet. I think it was about setting up a Zen center, and you said, I want my own entrance, and I have speaking hours and stuff like that. And I was kind of bitching about that. But the reason I was bitching about that, because I felt exactly the same at the time. I would love to kind of say, hey, it's 8 o'clock in the evening and I need to go to sleep, but people keep knocking on my door all the time. And well, you probably knew how it would be. That's why you kind of said these things. I mean, it's a personal koan that you have as a teacher as well, of course, also for the students. I mean, why do you want to practice, and what do you expect from the teacher? That's a question for the student. But then as a teacher, people expect something from you, and that's natural. How much do you want to compromise and give them of your attention, for example, help, instruction? And when do you start to say, hey, you need to start to wipe your own ass? I can do that for you, but you don't learn from me wiping your ass.
It's a good point. And I remember that discussion. I had actually lived in a meditation center for a time, and it wasn't my meditation center, but we did have our events once a week there. So people got very confused and assumed it was my meditation center, and they could show up anytime, and it became very annoying. But Tendo Nyojo let Dogen come up to his room anytime he wanted to. There's that famous story. So, but I think he only let Dogen do that. He didn't let anybody come and do that. So there is a kind of thing you have to be a little bit protective of your own self, because you can get lost very easily in other people's problems. And maybe I should be more willing to let other people come and ask me things.
But it's not easy, at least from my perspective. But maybe, people often compare me to you, or you to Muho, and I mean, that's, I think, a similarity we both have. I think we're not super social people.
Although
or at least, yeah, probably both understand that it's part of the practice to also share your practice, but it's not something. I'm not a party person, for example. Probably we are both kind of politically, well, in our minds, leftists, but then we're not the guys who go out on a demonstration and enjoy to protest there and shout. While for other people, it's less about the politics than about the social aspect. And if you're an antisocial person by nature, then that part of Sangha life is difficult.
Yeah, I imagine, especially for you, because I'm actually thinking hard about whether I want to start a sort of residential practice space. And right now it's impractical to start it, but I've started telling people, you know, which, you know, sometimes you don't know what you're going to start by just telling people, but I've started telling certain people that I think we should look into this, you know, look into a place where we can have, that'll be a residential practice space where a group of people can live and practice together, you know, in relative isolation from the rest of the world, you know. And I think that would be an important step to take. But I also, when I think about it, I think, oh, I'm sort of glad that it's impossible to do right now, because if I had to do it right now, I couldn't do it. But if I put it off, you know, in the future, maybe I'll be ready. But you know, you lived in Antaiji, and
I lived there for almost 30 years, and to be honest, I'm glad I left last year. I mean, it was good for me, and it was a great honor to live there, both as a monk and then later as the abbot. A great honor, but it was also a great burden.
Yeah.
Right now, I enjoy to have a weekly meeting in the park, but I'm not responsible for these people's lives. While when people come for Antaiji and they say, here, we come for good, then, well, you're responsible for them. And or at least they feel that you're responsible for them, and you feel part of that responsibility. You have to take
really
care of their visas. If they come from abroad, you have to be the guarantee for their visas. And if they are sick and they need to go to the hospital, you have to bring them there, and so on and so on. So I'm glad I'm out of there.
Yeah, I can see. I think I would have a hard time with that. And Taiji is I've never been there. It's very rural, isn't it?
It's 5 kilometers. So how would it, 1.5 miles to the next bus stop, and it's 50 kilometers to the next proper hospital. I mean, I'm married and I have 3 kids, so you call me the more traditional monk, but I mean, I'm not a monk in the sense of 200 years ago. And if you have kids and they need to go to school, it's impossible to go there from the school in the winter. So for 3 months, I have to live separately from my family. And so it was much harder probably for my wife and my children than for myself. I mean, I was complaining about it's not so easy to be the abbot of Antaiji, but it's much harder if you're living there as the wife of the abbot. And my wife, she grew up in Osaka, and she was never really into natural life and stuff like that. She never really wanted to be somewhere outside in the mountains.
Yeah, that's got to be tough. And I've seen pictures of the winters in Antaiji. So
it's hard. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. I really admire that you were able to do that, because you know, I've never done that sort of practice. You know, I've always had it a little bit too easy, and maybe that's why I'm thinking, you know, for this next phase of my life, I want to try something that's more dedicated and more, you know, maybe more difficult. And, you know, maybe it's good to have a year or most of a year when it's impossible to do anything. I don't know, you know, because it makes it makes me more prepared to, I hope, to actually take it on. And who knows, you know, I have no idea. I'm still scheduled to go to Europe in September. I think the middle of September is the first event that's scheduled in Finland. And I just keep, you know, a few months ago, I was like, well, this will be over by then. Now, as it becomes closer and closer, I'm going, I'm not sure if this will be over by then. So I really don't know when it'll become possible, but we all know that this situation isn't going to last forever. So there is an end. We just don't know when it'll be. And when that happens, I want to try to change my approach. And so, you know, I've been using this year to kind of get a sense of how I want that approach to be. And I'm still working on it. But I'd like to do something a little bit more like what you did in Taiji. And I don't know.
Yeah, I could imagine the demand is there.
Yeah.
The demand would be there. Yeah.
Who's taking over in Taiji? You told me before, but I forgot.
It's a Japanese student of mine, a nun. She's my age. So I was actually thinking maybe it could be somebody in their 30s, but it turned out that all of my younger students disappeared after 2 or 3 years, and she's the only one who's stuck. And so officially she's becoming the new abbess in September.
Okay.
And right now there's only 4 other monks, 1 Japanese, 3 foreigners living with her, but hopefully in the future it's going to grow again. And she's a very strong, well, you know, Japanese women, they can be pretty powerful.
Yeah. And
assertive as well. The image is always these obedient Japanese little women, smiling ladies, but she's a really hardcore woman, a hardcore Zen woman. Yeah. I'm kind of this intellectual guy, and she's less of an intellectual, but a very strong woman. She's going to take good care of the monastery, I think.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I'm glad it's in good hands. You know, being you know, I just got a book, Arthur Braverman. Do you know him?
Yes.
He put together a new book about Kodo Sawaki, and they sent it to me to put like a, you know, my opinion on it. Yeah. And it's really good. And it's so nice to have another book of Kodo Sawaki's teachings available in English.
It's a translation?
It's partly a biography and then partly a translation of his teachings. So it's about half and half. So the first half of the book is a biography that Arthur Braverman himself wrote. And the second half, I think he translated the pieces by Kodo Sawaki, but
I see.
So it's equal, and it's real good material.
Who's the publisher?
Oh, I've forgotten. Maybe I can write you an email later and tell you, because I can just go look at the book. But it's I might even be able to get you a copy of it. Yeah, it's great that temple is carrying on. There was a lot in the book about his last days at Taiji, and it was kind of touching. You know, I guess he went to live there. Well, I'm sure you know the story, but I didn't know the story. He couldn't walk anymore. He couldn't walk very far, and so that's when he finally decided to stop traveling, because he couldn't walk anymore. And so they talk about his last days in Taiji, where he could walk inside the temple, but that was about you know, all the traveling he could do, but how much he really appreciated that life in the temple. So you know, at the end of all that traveling, quite interesting story.
Do you still have time for a question about your new book on non-duality and ethics?
I can, yeah, sure.
Either way. If you, I mean, we talked for more than an hour already, but it's a topic that interests me, and I've been thinking about it a lot, because I have the feeling that, well, non-duality and ethics don't go well together.
Yeah. Well, that's the struggle. Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason why Zen sometimes seems to have problems with ethics, it's because of its non-dual aspects. We are all one. And you add this quote from Bendowa: when I do Zazen, the whole universe does Zazen, and the whole universe turns into enlightenment. So we don't need ethics then. I just sit in my room and the world is saved. And in Dogen, I have the feeling that in his young years, he emphasized the non-dual aspect a lot. But then in his later years, for example, he says, Bodaishin, to arouse Bodhi-mind, means to save others before you're saved yourself, which sounds very dual, both temporal, like he talking about salvation that might happen in the future or it might not happen, but you're not saved now, and you should save others. But if we're all one, how can I save another person when I'm not saved myself already now?
Yeah.
And so even in Dogen, you see this, or I seem to discover this kind of contradiction between the non-dual approach, where the solution is already there and you don't have to do anything, just sit down and shut up on your cushion. And then there's this more, well, in a way, dual aspect, and see, hey, there's another person there outside the door, go out and help them. Or there's this, the other day you quoted in your video, the Bodhisattva Shishoho, giving loving words. If we're all one, why would we speak in the first place?
Right.
If Red and Muho is one, we don't need to meet here on Zoom. I could just talk with myself in my mind. And
that's true,
do you know Simone Weil? I think her name is pronounced, a French philosopher or mystic.
No.
She lived in the first half of the last century. She was a French Jew, and later she, during the war, she went to England. I think some people say she starved there because she didn't want to eat more than the working class. So she starved herself to death. And she was also into, I think, Hinduism and stuff like that. And well, she says some interesting things about love I would like to read to you.
Sure,
One thing is, let us love this distance, which is thoroughly woven with friendship, since those who do not love each other are not separated. So she says, if you don't love each other, you're not separated. To love, you need to be separated. And she says, to love purely is to consent to distance, is to adore the distance between ourselves and that which we love. And of course, well, she isn't Zen or anything, but I think she has a point there. Like there's this pitfall in mysticism where you say, well, everything is myself. So why would I need ethics in the first place? Ethics seems to presume that we're all separate. We're all separate individual persons, and we make up a contract to not hurt each other's because we don't want the other to hurt ourselves. And non-dualism, why would we need that? But in practice, we do need it.
Yeah, that's the dilemma. And I mean, you just said, I really love those quotes. Maybe you can send them to me or something.
Yeah, I will.
In the email. But it's real interesting. I'm still trying to figure out how to write this book, because I think it's a challenge that needs to be done, and I need to do it. But especially today, I was just finding myself unable to write anything. And the problem is you get into this sort of dilemma. And somebody sent me an email saying there's this big discussion going on some Facebook Zen group about the idea of sentient beings, and that Dogen expands the idea of sentient beings to include fences, tiles, walls, and pebbles, and then he has that, the insentient speak the Dharma and all this stuff. So his idea of what is a sentient being includes all sorts of things we wouldn't normally think of. And the problem is when people hear that, then they become kind of paralyzed. Like either we have to have an ethics that separates sentient beings from insentient beings, or we can do nothing because we'd always be worried about harming rocks and harming, water and, harming the air by breathing it in or something like that. You get
Harming
into
the
these.
coronavirus. Yeah, we need
Yeah, harming the
compassion for the
coronavirus.
coronavirus.
Yeah. I mean, you could get really strange like that. And I don't know the answer, except to say that if you look at the history of Buddhism, you find a lot of people who don't worry so much about the answer. They have a very strong ethical system and they abide by it, and they're not so worried about whether it applies to everything or not. They just kind of live their lives. And you're right. If you think about it intellectually, you'd be like, either you could say non-dualism means you don't even need an ethical system because everybody is you, and so who cares? Or you take it the other way and say, well, because of non-dualism, the idea of everything is sentient and everything is alive, then you'd have to make an ethical system that went completely insane, to where you'd be paralyzed and unable to move. So either you're totally free or you're totally unable to move. But maybe it's always like all things, it's the middle way. There is I believe the non-dual outlook is the proper outlook. If you want to kind of express what the ultimate situation is, I can't see it any other way, that all of this has to be one thing, and so, that's even just a logical inference, also apart from, some of the experiences that, one has when one does Zazen, for long enough, you start to kind of have these little moments when that becomes very clear, and you go, okay, well, that's true. And so, but I also agree with the Buddhists and with Dogen and everybody that we have to be very, very ethical. And that ethics are supremely important. Dogen says in Shoaku Makusa that Buddhism is don't do wrong. The very essence of Buddhism is avoid doing wrong. Which is a very strong insistence, because you're like, well, what about the rest of it? No, the most important thing is don't do wrong. So how do you not do wrong? I can just tell you that as a writer, I'm kind of struggling with this, and I'm kind of, for the time being, at this point in the book, I'm writing the two things separately. I'm writing some chapters about the non-dual aspect of Buddhist life. I wrote this long commentary on Yobutsu. Yeah, Buddhas alone together with Buddhas is how Nishijima Roshi translated it, which is very sort of non-dual and stuff. And then trying to write some stuff about the precepts, which is very sort of taking an almost dualistic view of right and wrong. And I'm just going to try to figure out how to make the bridge, because I know there is a bridge. I just don't quite know what it is. But all of what you were saying is really good, and I'm going to try to remember that.
Yeah, it's a koan.
Yeah, I think actually in practice it's not so much of a difficulty. You just kind of, I want to be ethical. That's my feeling, and I think a lot of people do. I mean, that's one of the reasons I want to write this book, because I feel, especially with these protests and things that are going on in America these days, that there's a lot of people who are very concerned about ethics. But I also think they're making some serious mistakes in how they go about trying to promote ethics, because they're trying to use unethical behavior to promote ethical behavior, and I don't think that ever works. But I think some of them don't even recognize their behavior as unethical, because they don't think of things in the right way. They don't think that that, for example, making a lot of noise and disturbing people who are already in a very disturbed state of mind to begin with they don't think of that as unethical behavior, but I do, you know. So I think, oh, you've got to find a way. You got to find a way to do this without breaking your own, destroying the very thing you're trying to accomplish while you're trying to accomplish it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Today, July 2nd, according to your Twitter account, it's UFO, World UFO Day. Are you going out tonight and hunt for UFOs?
No, I just noticed somebody put it on Instagram. It's the World UFO Day, and I was like, really? I didn't know there was a World UFO Day. So,
I see. Yeah, I didn't know it until I saw your Twitter account. Yeah.
No, I don't know what I think. I don't know if I believe in UFOs or not, but I think it's a fascinating little hobby to look at that stuff.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you. It was great to talk to you.
Good.
Hopefully at some time in the future we meet in person.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm one of my things that I've decided to do once this is over is go to Japan, because I haven't been to Japan since 2010, I think. So it's 10 years. So as soon as they say Americans can go to Japan again, I'm gonna look into getting a flight. So I'll come through Osaka and see you.
Yeah, that would be great. So now I'm in the city. Easy to meet. Yeah.
Good.
You're going to Europe in October this year?
September. I mean, I'm scheduled to. I honestly don't know if it'll be possible or not. I hope it's possible. I hope they have some kind of system in place that allows that to happen.
I see. I was hoping to go end of August, beginning of September, but I already canceled my trip this year. But well, I hope it works for you.
Yeah, I hope so too. I don't know. I was more optimistic before. Now I'm kind of wondering. But yeah, I still have a bunch of events planned. We'll see.
Great. Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll meet, and it was great. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, very nice talking to you as well. And I should let you have your morning since it's morning.
Well, maybe just as you, I don't have much to do except sit in my apartment. And well, now it's possible to sometimes go begging, or I've been doing talks for most of the time last year, and the first talks they started again. So it's possible to give public talks again. It's slowly starting again.
Well, good. I'm glad Japan is getting it together more than we are. All right, great. We'll talk to you again soon, I hope. And
thank you. I sent you these quotes by Simone Weil, and I will upload this to YouTube, and I put links to your homepage and your Patreon page and stuff like that, as you always do. Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay, you too. Talk to you later.